The investigation was into the death of Nicholas Billingham, who was murdered by Fiona Beal, we believe back on the 1st of November 2021. Slightly unusual circumstances in how it all came about, but it ultimately resulted from a journal being found when a cause for concern was called into the police around her welfare. She was treated as a missing person, ultimately found in Cumbria, having attempted to take her own life. And at the scene of that particular location, there was a journal and a few other items set out, almost like a goodbye note. And in the content of that journal, there were comments and there were references to her potentially having caused harm to Nicholas Billingham. He was ultimately himself raised as a high-risk missing person, and that instigated what then became an investigation into his disappearance and ultimately his murder. Over the preceding months that followed that, we have started to identify where we believed his body was located. The sentence, when you look at it, is not one that I think will ever bring that element of closure to the family, but I think it does reflect the seriousness and the gravity of the offence she committed. She's ultimately robbed a mother of her son. She's ultimately robbed the daughter of their mother, and ultimately taken away somebody who's a good friend and associate to many other people. The sentence reflects the severity and the gravity of the really evil and cold nature of the crime she committed. Some of the challenges around securing eviction, bearing in mind she had admitted to the killing, were the defences that she raised, and they were around diminished responsibility and loss of control. Her argument was that she killed him because of a series of events, because of a relationship, because of the circumstances in their home life and their existence together. The work that then instigated required us to investigate those defences to understand, well, did she have them or not? So it was quite complex in us we were looking at friends, we're looking at associates, we're looking at colleagues, we're looking at family, to understand their relationship, to understand the dynamic between the pair of them, to see if there were any of these coercive controlling behaviours, to see if there was any domestic abuse, to see if there was any financial control, physical control, or any abuse that occurred in the relationship. It's not just looking back at a couple of years, it's looking back at the lifespan of their relationship and understanding that time period of their life to see if there was elements of that existence that show that there was a degree or an argument around diminished responsibility. Was it a spontaneous event? Was it something that was pre-planned? Was it a catalogue of events that occurred that built up and up and up to the point where she decided, enough's enough, I'm going to have to do something? So quite a complex matter in terms of looking at those arguments, calling in specialists like psychologists and psychiatrists and coercive controlling behaviour specialists to understand as best we're able their relationship. Finding the journal at the cabin in Cumbria was unusual. It was her diary, as it were. It was her thoughts on a page. And whilst it wasn't a direct admission to killing him, it certainly made reference to him coming to harm. It talked about events of how she would go about planning and doing it, around luring him in, around making sure he was wearing an eye mask, that she had the appropriate tools and weapon with her to commit the crime, all of which raised significant concerns for the attending officers in Cumbria to say, who is she talking about and where is this individual? Because it was obviously quite concerning. That in itself prompted a call to Northamptonshire Police, and we then had significant concerns around Nick Billingham and where he currently was. So the officers that got that information, the good colleagues in CID, then deployed to the location and conducted an investigation. And it's through their efforts and through those early steps that identified down in the basement of Moore Street, the home address of Nicholas Billingham, that there was a mattress upturned and on top of some clothing. And it's only when that mattress was turned over and there appeared to be quite a large blood-staining patch on the corner of it that they thought that there's something unusual here, something not quite right. They then dug into those clothing underneath and had a look at it, and that's when they realised it was blood-stained. I think what really tipped it, and it was a fantastic observation by the officer, was that as they were leaving the address to make sure it was secure for a full forensic examination, was in the back of the address there appeared to be new bedding, new chippings on a path in the back garden. And it just looked out of place when you looked at the rest of the garden. It looked fresh, it looked new, and it just triggered a concern or a worry. We've got a mattress here with blood, we've got clothing here, and we've got this fragrantly, looks like dug patch of earth. And that's what prompted then a call to us in the major crime team to say, we're concerned about this guy, we think potentially could have come to harm. That's when major crime and myself have got involved, and that's when we've started looking at it and thinking, actually, if this has been an act of murder. Firstly, the most important steps for us when we were notified was engaging with family, It's building a relationship, especially with Yvonne, his mother, who was an absolute stalwart through this investigation, really supportive, fantastic individual. Once we built that relationship, it's around making sure that we then secure that scene, so the address at Moore Street, and we start conducting those inquiries. So it was calling in all the relevant experts. So we had an archaeologist in, forensic archaeologist, had the crime scene specialist there to make sure that everything was recovered and recorded and photographed appropriately. And it was about determining actually, was Nicholas Billingham buried in that back garden. We were fortunate within the East Midlands region that we've got a specially trained JOG that's trained to identify blood and body matter, and it was put into the back garden, and it indicated very strongly that there was something underneath the soil, underneath the ground. And ultimately we unearthed a breeze block type coffin location, and unfortunately, Nicholas Billingham was found inside it. It was then making sure that we got Fiona Beal into custody, and the investigation could then pursue inquiries through her and then ultimately through the Crown Prosecution Service to seek that charge for his murder. When we investigated the death of Nicholas Billingham, we identified his location, his remains on or around 16th, 17th of March 2022. But when we look back through the history of his life and his existence, so we looked at his phone, we looked at his finances, we looked at his contact with people, it became evident that he died, we believe, on the evening of the 1st of November 2021, some 5 months prior to this time. But then when we started engaging with Yvonne, his mother, and talked about her knowledge of him last time she saw him and the contact, it then painted a picture that he'd been in touch with her on phone during this period, which obviously went against what we knew around his life and when he potentially died. Which then caused us concern around, well, if he did die on that location, that date, but there are phone messages going on after, who's got his phone and who's sending these? And it's through those inquiries we then managed to identify that those messages, we believe, were sent by Fiona Beal, and they were sent from the home address, so she was in control of his phone. She's been in touch with friends, with family, including Yvonne, purporting that he's well, he's down in Essex, he's living a different life, keeping up the illusion that he's still alive. And that, I think, was really difficult for Yvonne to grasp, that she's ultimately been talking to the person that's killed her son. And then to have the knowledge that on the Christmas of 2021, prior to the police even being aware that this murder had occurred, she'd gone to the address to take some Christmas presents round, and hopefully meet and greet and say hello, not to realise that less than 10 yards away from where she was stood having a cup of tea at Christmas, her son was buried, having been murdered. I think there's two sides to Fiona Beal. You've got Fiona Beal that everybody knew. You've got Fiona Beal, the teacher, that was competent, that was good with the kids, very articulate, very intelligent lady. But then you've got this other side that nobody saw, the personality, or the aspect of her personality she even referred to as Tulip 22. It was this dark side to her. She wrote about it in her journals. She'd referenced it previously. And I think it was her aspect of her character that had a bit of escapism. It was kind of the dark thoughts in her mind and the manifestation of those thoughts. And I think it's the Tulip 22 side of her that people didn't see that enabled her to commit this crime. So she was able to live this existence and keep this appearance up of being a competent, capable individual. In her words, in the light of Nicholas Billingham running off with another lady, knowing full well that it was actually her that had killed him. It was a side to her character that people just didn't see, and she kept quite hidden. But it was a very dark and quite evil side to it, and that was clear in the planning and the preparation that she went through around how she was going to commit the act, how she was going to lure him in, even down to the very fact of we believe, cable tying him whilst he was laying down, making sure there was an eye mask on to almost move that personal contact, so she didn't have that eye-to-eye contact as she committed the ultimate act of stabbing him and killing him. I'm sat here as kind of the face of this investigation, but it's the team behind me that work with me that do all the hard work, and they've put a huge amount of effort in. The OIC for this case, the family liaison officer, my deputy, a real 3 key roles in this investigation have done a sterling job, but it's been a huge amount of hard work. You put a lot of effort into preparing yourself ready for trial, and then you sit through a trial of nearly 16 weeks before, almost in the final throes, it collapses because of a legality issue. It's disheartening, more so to the team, but also to the family, because they also sit through it. They want that result at the end. We knew the trial was going to be, the second trial was going to be at some point in the future, and that actually presented us with a bit more time. it allowed us to interrogate stuff that we couldn't have done previously. Actually, we had more time to do it. So the team, and again, the whole of the major crime team and the initial officers and the uniform officers are all involved in the early stages of the investigation, did a really, really good job. A few days into that second trial, I think Fiona realises the extent of the evidence and the quality of the investigation, and she's been pushed into a corner where she's only got one choice. I think she knew those defences that she was going to raise weren't going to be sufficient. And I think the guilty pleas reflect on the fact of the quality of the hard work that the team have put in to get to this point. Yvonne, Nick's mother, has been fantastic. You know, she's a real, just a really likeable, lovable person. She's been a real support to a family liaison officer, has been a real good friend to me in terms of talking to me and giving me, you know, that support and having engagement with the investigation. So my thanks to her and her partner as well for their support. But also, you know, their daughter as well. It's a difficult time for her. You know, she's going to lose her mum to prison. She's lost her father, but you know, he's been stolen from her, and she's so young. So you know, it's going to be a difficult journey for her as well.